what I'm talking about here is chronic negativity. There are people who are they're so full of negativity, sour spirit, nasty attitude, that they not only miss out on any joy that might have otherwise been there for them, but they even mess it up for other people. Now, where do people find this chronic negativity? Well, the same way you find anything in this world, you seek after it. Remember how Jesus said, "Seek and you shall find"? Man, truer words were never spoken. You will find what you seek, regardless of what it is you seek. It's a mighty good thing if you seek after righteousness and godliness and after better relationship with the people around you. You seek that long enough and hard enough, you'll find it. But the opposite, the flip side's also true. If you get focused on negative things, sorrowful, nasty things, you do that, and that's what you'll find. Because, by the way, they're both there in this world. There are good things and there are bad things. But a whole lot of your happiness will depend on which one you seek after, which one you look for. That's the one you'll find. Sad thing is, a whole lot of Christians who ought to know better spend much of their lives seeking after the very worst. They go out looking for the very things that are going to destroy their happiness. They don't do it on purpose. They do it without realizing what they do. Father, forgive them. They know not what they do. But a preacher's job is to point out how this is happening, why this is happening, and what we can do to keep it from happening, to keep our joy from getting blocked and overtaken by a sour spirit. I want to take you to Philippians 4:8. I want you to read a translation of Philippians 4:8 that you may not have seen before. I just came across it. Now, this is a familiar verse, and here's how it goes. This is the pessimistic sicko version of Philippians 4:8. Finally, suckers, whatsoever things are rumored, whatsoever things are twisted and misrepresented, whatsoever things are wrong, whatsoever things are filthy, whatsoever things are ugly, whatsoever things bring bad news, if there be any corruption, if there be anything worthy of criticism, think and dwell on these things. Does the Bible say that? A whole lot of Christians operate as if it does. Now let me give you the real version. This is from the King James. This is the right stuff to seek, to find, and to dwell in. Finally, brethren, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are of good report, if there be any virtue and if there be any praise, think on these things. Think on these things. Why do we find it so hard to think on these things? It's because of some of the bad thinking habits we've established down through the years. That's the reason. And I'll point out a couple of those that many of you will relate to. Two things, two habits that'll block your joy in a hurry. You know what the first one is? Mind reading. I mentioned mind reading last week, but I did not really explain fully what I meant by that. Mind reading is when you see the expression on another person's face and you think you know exactly what it means. Usually, if you've got the joy blocking problem, you will assume that that expression means something terrible. They're mad with you, they don't like you, whatever. Also, you can get a text. Boy, the most tempting time to be a not really clear. It could be taken either way. And here's where you're going to find out what your mental habits are. If you automatically assume that this person is subtly insulting me, you better pay attention here. You got a mind reading problem. Reality is, mind reading is not one of the spiritual gifts listed in the Bible. And so, if you are a mind reader, you didn't get that gift from God. And it's going to cause you a lot of unnecessary trouble. Now, I'm a mind reader, have been for years. And I recently began conducting an experiment. And I have a chart here that I started 2 weeks ago, and it's called the Mind Reading Experiment. And first I list the client. That is the person whose mind I'm reading. And then I list, there's a second column, what I think they're thinking. And the third column is one that I fill in only after some time has passed and I found out what they actually were thinking. That is, I get a chance to talk to them. Well, this morning, Larry and Kate Wood are from DeQueen. They came to our church once and loved it so much that they began coming every single Sunday, all the way from DeQueen. Told me they plan to continue to do that. But then last month, they missed 2 Sundays in a row. And I immediately read their minds. I knew what that meant. I even wrote it down. That means they've gotten sick of my preaching. And they do not like me anymore. They're never coming back. And not only that, they're going to tell everybody they can, don't go to CCF. That's my mind reading. I wrote it down. Yesterday, I got to talk with Kate Wood. And she said just what I really knew she would. When I told her that, she just laughed and laughed and laughed. And she said, oh, it's funny the things we tell ourselves, isn't it, Lance? She said, we love the church. We wouldn't go anywhere else. But we have a son who's ill, and we've had to be away with him. And we're going to be there all we possibly can, though. And she and I both had a good laugh about it, and she told me I could tell you about it. Now, let me ask you this. When I was writing down the mind reading experiment on Larry and Kate Wood from DeQueen, did I, on some level, know that I was being ridiculous? Yes. Logic ridiculous. You have no reason to think this. There's no evidence for it whatsoever. But have you ever noticed that the emotions are stronger than the logic sometimes? And I felt the worst. And so my feelings, my emotional gut reaction read their mind and gave me a twisted understanding. And I want you to be very cautious of all your mind reading, because you will find that you are rarely, if ever, correct. I've been paying attention to this for the last couple of years and noticed I don't think I've been right a single time in all the minds I've read in recent years. But now I'm doing this chart to actually map it out. And before long, I'll no longer be a mind reader. But let me tell you something that's closely related. There are mind readers. That'll block your joy. But there are also false prophecies. that will block your joy. False prophecies that will block your joy. Now, there are the obvious types of false prophets. Those are the people in the outer world who mess up your belief system and it sends you off on the wrong path spiritually, causes you a lot of unnecessary trouble. Yes, watch out for those false prophets. No question about it. But there's another kind of false prophet that not as many people are conscious of, paying attention to, and therefore he prophesies all sorts of terrible things and they believe it. Things that never really happened. And I'm talking about there's a little false prophet in you and there's a little false prophet in me. I should say in most of you. Most, not all. We talked about that last week too. Many of us have a little false prophet within us. And that little false prophet sends up thoughts like this. Hey, this is not going to work out. This new goal you set, there's no way you're going to achieve it. This new relationship you started, it's going to fall apart like all the others. This new friend you met, they'll soon dump you. This new job you got, this new promotion, you're not going to be able to handle that. There's a false prophet who lives inside a lot of us. And the reason I say he's false prophet is that almost everything, no, I'll say everything, he sends into your mind in the form of a thought is false. But if you believe him, if you believe those thoughts, it will completely stop your forward progress. It'll hinder you in your relationship with God. It'll hurt you in your relationship with other people. Your life and your mind will be a mess. And then what happens is a lot of those false prophecies come true. Because you're not thinking correctly, you do mess up. I told you. But it's only because you didn't recognize him for what he was. Let me give you a scripture from Matthew 7. Verse 15 and 16, where Jesus talks about false prophets. And there's no question here that the context of this saying is that he is referring to false prophets in the outer world. Make that clear. However, everything he says about these prophets in the outer world applies to the kind of false prophets that are within you, those negative thoughts that you're having. Same stuff applies. Read it with me. Matthew chapter 7, beginning in verse 15. Beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravening wolves. What's that sheep's clothing all about? Well, here it is. When we're talking about these false prophets from within, these prophets will always say, look, I'm just trying to be realistic with you. You need to be realistic. I'm trying to help you here. You are going to fail if you try this. That is the deception. That's the sheep's clothing. The thoughts will give you the impression that they're here to help you. Inwardly, ravening wolves. You believe those thoughts? They'll devour you. They'll destroy you. In verse 16, Jesus tells how you identify a false prophet. You will know them by their fruits. Fruits are what they produce. What comes from these prophecies? You'll know them by their fruits. Grapes are not gathered from thorn bushes, nor figs from thistles, are they? Give that some thought. Grapes, thistles. if you want to know whether or not a thinking pattern, a long-term thinking pattern that's well established in your mind, if you want to know whether it's a true prophet or a false prophet, whether it's coming, or to say it a different way, these are really just analogies. To say it a different way, is it coming from God or is it coming from Satan? Okay? Here's how you tell it's coming from Satan or it's something false. You look at what it produces. Jesus said grapes, and he mentioned thorns, thistles. The idea is whatever is true, whatever is wholesome, whatsoever things are of good report, and so forth, Philippians 4:8. Those things, those thoughts will produce good things in your life. They will make you a fruitful person with much good to share with many others. And that's one way you'll know that the thoughts you're having are from God rather than some demonic force. On the other hand, if you are paying attention to these negative, pessimistic, sourpuss thoughts, and you're believing them, and you find that your relationships are getting all messed up, and you can't seem to get along with people, and you start failing in areas where you've always been successful, wake up, wake up. The thistles, those are from believing the wrong stuff. See, what you believe determines what you become. That's why belief is so important. That's why it's so important to believe the right things about God. And that's why it's so important to believe the right things about yourself and the world. The truth is what sets you free. Beware of those false prophets. Learn to identify them when they first crop up. Maybe you need to make a list of all the discouraging, defeatist thoughts that typically come up in your mind and repeat themselves over and over and over. I challenge you to do that. Go home today and make a list on a piece of paper. Get them out of your head and onto a piece of paper. Write down all the negative thoughts that come to you on a regular basis about yourself, about God, and about other people. You write them down. And as you're writing them down, you will recognize that many of those thoughts are just false prophecies from hell. You will expose them. You'll stop believing them. You'll believe God instead of the false prophet. And your joy is going to grow. When it comes to this stinking thinking stuff, you need to know this. If you are one of those people who struggle in this area, and that's most of us. Remember I said last week, this is not everybody. But those of you who have no problem whatsoever with mind reading and false prophets, and you got a great attitude and outlook, thank God you do. But recognize a whole lot of the people that you work with, live with, interact with are not like you. And if you understand what I'm talking about today, you will understand them a whole lot better. And therefore, you will be able to relate to them and get along with them in a much better way because you'll understand how they tick. And therefore, you'll stop pushing their buttons and setting them off unnecessarily. Now, back to those of you who do have this false negative view of everything. It's like it's gotten stronger the longer you've lived because you've fed it. You need to know this one statement. Let it be branded on your mind. You cannot afford the luxury of a negative thought. You cannot. You cannot. If you or a person who has very little, if any, joy because it's getting blocked by stinking thinking of all sorts of kinds, you cannot afford even one negative thought because you can't handle it. It'll get you on a roll and you won't be able to hell. Do you know how an alcoholic, a true alcoholic, absolutely, positively cannot take even one drink? Whereas people who are not alcoholics can have a drink with their meal and it affects them not at all. But that alcoholic, one drink, he starts downward. Same way with those of us who are negaholics. One thought that you let pass and you don't challenge it, it'll lead to another and another, and it starts snowballing and snowballing. You can't afford that. I just want to ask you, if you discovered that one of the foods you eat on a daily basis, this is part of your staple diet. If you discovered that one of those foods was making you sick, would you keep eating it? What's something that you eat every single day of your life? For some of us, a bowl of cereal, cup of coffee. You don't even think you can function without doing that. If you found it was making you sick, though, really, really sick, and infecting the people around you, making them sick too, would you stop drinking it? Would you stop eating it? I hope the answer is yes. But I'll tell you this. Thoughts are the food for the soul. Thoughts that are coming from God and Holy Scripture, or whether they be thoughts that are coming from the enemy and false prophecies. Your thoughts, you are what you eat. Many of us continually, day after day, sometimes hour after hour, continue thinking thoughts that make us sick. And today, we've identified what some of those are. And now I'm asking you, are you going to keep eating that? Are you going to keep that in your cabinet? Or will you clean out the cabinets of your mind? It's amazing how many people are fully aware that they are, let me say it this way. Many people are fully aware that they do have something in their life that is stopping up the joy, and yet they're not willing to get rid of it. It reminds me of a man who went into a fruit stand one day. And the man behind the counter in the fruit stand had a banana in his ear. In fact, it was like crammed up in there, and the part in his ear was squished up so bad it went way up into his head, the rest hanging out. Had a banana in his ear. Well, the customer said, "Sir, do you know you've got a banana in your ear?" And the clerk said, "What? Huh? In my ear." He knew he had a banana in his ear. But rather than take it out, he expected other people to adapt their behavior to suit his weirdness. Now, I hope you're laughing because you get this, that those of us with bananas in our ear who won't remove them, you know what? We're the ones being weird. We're the ones breaking down communication. We are the ones stirring up the trouble, but rather than take the banana out, we expect other people to adapt their speech, their language, their way of operating so that we can keep the banana in our ear. Listen. Is that the way you want to live? Is that the way you want people around you to have to live? Come on now. If you won't do it for yourself, do it for others. I get tired of hearing people, I've heard it all my life, well, it doesn't hurt anybody but me. Listen. You got joy blockers in your life? Unless you are a complete hermit who never sees another living soul, then it's hurting everybody you deal with to some degree or another. It will affect the person, the old lady at the red light in front of you who's real slow about taking off. It'll affect her because you'll honk and holler. It'll affect the poor little cashier girl who made a mistake on your order. Most of all, it'll affect those people who work with you, who live with you. Listen, everywhere you are, you bring yourself and you introduce who you are into the environment. And therefore, everywhere you go, you make that place a little better or a little worse depending on what you are and how you are. And if you're full of poison and unforgiveness and greed and resentments and all of these joy-blocking things, that's what you'll give off. And people aren't going to want to be around that. Don't force them to have to live with that. You know, we got, first there were no smoking sections in restaurants. And now you can't smoke at all because because smoke travels. Listen, there ought to be no stinking thinking sections in every church so that others don't have to breathe in the toxicity we're speaking out. Listen, do this for others. Deal with these blocks. Remove them. And if they're too big for you to remove, then for Christ's sake, get somebody to help move them.